Hello everyone, I'm Ryan11 and today I'm gonna look at the infamous Verge PC build video. I'm gonna look if I can give any commentary on what you could do better. I haven't seen that video in a while, so let's take a look.
So a few years ago, TC, or managing editor, built a gaming desktop, but it's kind of out of date and it's definitely not going to hold up for Battlefield 5. So let's build a new one. You can build a gaming desktop for around $1,000, but I want to go all out, so I spent around $2,000.
Now those amounts are actually not too odd, especially for the time. If there wasn't a pandemic right now, you could make those PCs a lot cheaper, maybe high-end for 1200, mid-range 800, low-end 600, 700, but there's a pandemic sadly.
A PC like this is going to be able to play most games at ultra settings.
Now what bothers me here is that there's no resolution mentioned, so people are going to presume 1080, I guess, but it should run low-end 4K, high frame rate 1440p, so that's kind of bad.
So what do you need to build a desktop? Well, of course, first you need a table.
Now that's kind of cringe and also kind of untrue. Like any surface that's going to be clean and you're going to be not getting electricity, it's fine, honestly.
Preferably not metal. If it's going to be metal, have an anti-static working surface layered on top of it, a thermal paste applicator.
Now that's an odd one because I've never heard of anyone actually buy those. Usually they're either a necessary or included.
An Allen wrench.
Now that's very case specific, so usually you would get one if you need it, and otherwise you don't need it at all, same as the applicator basically.
Some tweezers to tighten up the wires, a
Cable ties.
Swiss Army knife which hopefully has a Phillips head screwdriver in
Don't you have a Phillips head screwdriver?
it. And last but not least, an anti-static bracelet, which is to protect you and the parts. These are the parts you're going to need, but more importantly, before we get there, we need to understand what these parts are doing and how they interact with one another.
Now that explanation is actually pretty fine, but useless actually, because it's so basic that you can't really use it for choosing parts.
So it's best you unbox them, isolate the parts that you really need, place items into the...
Now, getting them unpacked and pour them once is fine, but I don't get why you would need to put them in the case. Like, you should have known if they fit, otherwise you shouldn't order them.
Case and make sure that they all fit, and then start working. And now we're really going to start building by adding the motherboard in.
Now that's way too early. Why would you do that?
Some notes about installing motherboards: they're really delicate, you should be really careful with them.
Now they're actually not that delicate. You should be careful, obviously, but you can shove them around if you have issues with it being stuck or something.
And screw in with confidence, but also don't screw in too hard, otherwise you could crack the board.
Now that's odd wording, but it's true. Basically, if you feel the board, basically you feel pressure, then you should stop.
I chose Asus's Z370 motherboard for two main reasons. One, it has built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and also it has support for NVMe SSDs, meaning you can get...
Now that's pretty standard, and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is on a lot of boards, and only get it obviously if you need it.
Really fast SSDs that are really easy to install.
Now basically every modern board has some kind of M.2 slot. It might not always be NVMe, but the easy install is going to be in any modern board.
Pay close attention to the brace that goes at the back of the computer. You always have to make sure that you really hammer it in, because
odd wording, but yes, it needs to be placed correctly.
There's no screw, it really just has to go outside of the case and clasp onto the frame. And this is very important because otherwise you can't align the motherboard correctly with the hole.
True. If it's not correctly in place, I've had that, it's gonna be hell to place the board.
We're just going to start installing all 8 screws. So next we're going to install the RAM on the motherboard. I chose Corsair's 16GB Vengeance LED RAM.
Now Vengeance is considered mediocre pretty widely, but if you really like the look of the RGB version, then it's fine, I guess.
For two main reasons. One, it has LEDs and we do like lights in our gaming desktops. Secondly, it's pretty fast RAM. It's 2666 megahertz, I believe.
Now that's very slow. Even at that time, that's basically the lowest that's always supported on boards.
So it's pretty fast, and this motherboard supports that speed, which is most important.
That would be important if it wasn't so slow.
Open the slots first, and just
you only have 2 sticks.
Lining the stick with the middle of the strip, not
now
with the end,
down.
and just lining that up with the logo. So once you hear
and what the hell is he doing? It looks like it's in 2
that
slots.
solid clasp, and you don't see the gold connectors.
Did it just move
on the side anymore? That's when you know the RAM is in. Step 3.
And now it's in slot 3 and 4, which is wrong.
We're going to install the hard drive, or in this case, the NVMe SSD.
An SSD is not a type of hard drive.
I chose this format of solid-state drive so that I could input it into the motherboard without having to worry about extra wires or
that's pretty reasonable.
Or putting it in a separate part of the case and just getting really messy. This is from Kingston, and it's 480 gigabytes, so it's not a lot, but you can always upgrade this and swap it out. And
that's a really bad idea, because if you're gonna swap it out, you lose, you basically lose money. You should just buy what you need the first time. Don't go overkill, don't go underkill, because it basically wastes money both ways.
It's only held down by one screw and the latch, so it's really simple and really straightforward. Speed for gaming is important when it comes to a hard drive. You want files to write quickly and you want games to load quickly, so that's why it's best if you use an SSD.
So he thinks an SSD is a category of hard drives. Also, games don't really benefit that much from storage speed. Basically, if you have a good hard drive, most games are gonna perform optimally, but if you have a few that don't, just put them on your primary drive, which should be an SSD.
Okay, so step 4, we're going to install the graphics card. I chose PNY's GTX 1080, which is overclocked, and so it's a pretty easy installation. You're just going to find the gold connectors, and you're going to line this bracket with the back end bracket of your PC case. Now, which lane you choose depends entirely on what other parts you're going to put in the system.
Now, that's not true. Basically, always you should put it in the top slot, because the bottom one is likely to be limited on speed, connected differently, which means that a video card might lose even speed from being put there.
I'm just going to pick the top one because the SSD is at the bottom and I don't want to cover it. I just think it looks nice. Click down. Take your remaining brackets and just
now this is all very case specific. You shouldn't mention this.
Put them in the spots that you haven't used. You don't have to screw these in. They get bolted down by the back end bracket. And your GPU is installed. Power supply time.
I personally would do the power supply first, because it's really annoying to fit. It's really bulky with all those cables. So I really like to put it first. Again, he shouldn't put the motherboard first, regardless of what he's doing. But that's personally what I like.
I chose Corsair's 850 watt power supply because I need enough headroom for ray tracing GPUs when they come out. And
now that's kind of bullshit, because they still need a way to cool. And it's not like the power consumption is going to go up infinitely with more power, because all power that goes into the card is going to be converted into heat. So it's not like the next generation has to be more power hungry. It's going to be more efficient. Otherwise, it's going to overheat. It's not going to be fun to design.
I don't want to have to upgrade it again. So all you have to do is take the brick and make sure that you align it with these little insulating pads.
Again, this is case specific.
So the power supply doesn't short circuit and come into...
Now, I don't get why he says short circuit, because the front of the power supply external case is going to attach to the case. So I don't get why he says that.
Contact with the rest of the system. So just take it in, slide it in nice and easy until you have a snug fit, and then shift it to the back and make sure it's right up against the frame. Now you just take the required screws and you tighten and screw in. So next step, we're going to install this.
You should, by the way, probably push against the PSU while doing the screwing, because otherwise it might move and then it's mounted maybe a bit sideways or something.
CPU core. In this case, it's going to go on the top end of the case, and we're just going to have the hose hang out for a little while.
That's fine, unless maybe you have the pump up and all the air is going to get into it. I don't think that's a huge risk, but I don't see why you would put it in already.
until we install the processor, which is going to come a little later. Always be sure to try to place it in the system first before you install it, because you can see it takes up a lot of space.
Which is exactly why we would do it last, because then it's not in the way.
But in this case, no pun intended, it fits in perfectly, and we're gonna start screwing it in. And so there's nothing special about this screwing in process. They're just really long screws because they go through the entire frame of the cooler.
Doesn't have to be.
And they take forever. So next up, cables. Every power supply is gonna come with a big bag of
That's bullshit.
Velcro cables. It's kind of daunting at first, so you always have to find the ones that are gonna fit. In this case, you need to match those cables with the correct descriptions on the power supply.
Just check the manual.
Next step is we're connecting the power supply to the motherboard with the 24-pin cable. We're just matching that cable from the motherboard.
It's so messy, oh god.
Threading it through the back and attaching the 24-pin header to the power supply so that we can have one of the connections complete. The next few additions will be for the GPU, for any specific ports that the case has, for any lighting that the case has, the CPU cooler, anything else really. We're installing the CPU, the heart of...
The reason I would do those kind of smaller cables first is because they're a huge pain, because they're all small. So having all those big things in there hanging around, it's going to be really stupid when you're trying to get all those small cables. And that's why I would do the smaller ones first and then do the 12 volts, the cooler later.
The computer or the brain, depending on how you look at it. So to do this, we're just going to remove the plastic covering that they put on the motherboard. We're just going to take this little plastic part out. We'll just toss that out of here.
Yeah, and you should keep that for warranty. Kind of like, you think about these kind of things and then they're like, why would you suggest this?
And now we have an exposed CPU holder, or rather slot, on the motherboard.
Sockets.
And we're going to use the CPU applicator. This is a special little part that not everyone may get, but this motherboard
Yeah, this is super specific. I've never seen these.
That we got from ASUS definitely does have. It's called a CPU installation tool. It makes it really useful if you want to install a Core i7 hexa-core CPU. Yeah, we've got one, and it's an 8th generation chip, and it's ready to go, and it supports overclocking. So what having this little installer does for you is it's basically a brace that you can apply.
I like how he calls everything a brace.
Right to the CPU and light it up with the triangles that you'll see on the bottom left corners. And this will make it easier for us to apply it to the motherboard and then apply thermal paste and then apply a CPU cooler on top.
Not really, honestly, because the CPU socket has itself a holder. It's kind of, but not really.
And we're just going to carefully lean it down into the system and make sure that
I don't get why it looked like he was pushing. There should be no need.
everything lines up, and we're going to clasp down on it and we'll be good to go. So we're about to apply thermal paste to the CPU. Every CPU cooler actually comes with a bit of thermal paste
Not true.
already neatly applied in a circle around it, but it's usually not enough. It's good.
That's also not true.
Essentially PC building practice to have a little bit extra and layer it on top of the CPU. The final...
That's a really bad idea, because if it's on the cooler, you want a layer as thin as possible, which is why it's perfect. It's already pre-applied, because you're never going to get such a thin layer yourself. So it's actually an upside to have that little, as long as it's not too little, which is not going to happen from a professional application unless it's damaged or something and you scraped a bunch of paste off.
Portion is to add the CPU cooler to the top end of the processor. So you're going to see that there are 4 brackets, or rather like...
It looks so messy. I don't know why you would apply it like that.
Screws in here with brackets and holders right here. And they're going to keep the cooler raised off the processor, but it's also going to be close enough to actually physically come in contact with it, like basically keep it cool. Take thumb screws like this and just screw them on. So now that our internals are done, we're going to put all the panels back on, which is the top glass, side glass, front glass, and of course the back panel where all of this fun stuff is happening. So we fully built the PC.
It's so messy. Like, I have bad cable management, but it's terrible.
Everything's put together and we got to the post screen. So what's next? Well, you need a USB flash drive with your Windows installation media on it, and of course a license key. So
You actually don't need it to install it. You need it to activate it, which means you can also use it for free if you just keep it unactivated.
I plugged that up, installed Windows in a couple of minutes, installed a bunch of drivers, and now we have a fully functioning gaming PC ready to run some games. Right now I've got Arma 3 running at maximum settings, native resolution, which is 1080p HD.
So it does mean 1080p. That's kind of sad with $2,000.
And it's running pretty smoothly. Like, I'm averaging 70 and 80 FPS, and this is normally like a very intensive game to run.
I wonder if he's playing multiplayer, because I've played this in single player and it's actually really easy to run. People always complain about Arma being heavy, but then it's about multiplayer.
And it's still doing a pretty good job. So right now I'm playing League of Legends. It's one of my favorite games. I'm actually playing against a bot, and
That's fine, but they're really light game. I don't get why you would showcase this.
Distracted, so I'm not actually doing so well. But otherwise, like, this is pretty much what you would see me do on a gaming computer. Test stuff out, and hopefully have really high frame rates like I am right now. I'm averaging 120 FPS, and that's only because I've actually locked the game to that frame rate, because I can get around 300 FPS playing League on maximum settings, which is a little bit absurd, and you don't really need that, so I locked it. Building a gaming desktop has been a great experience. I'm able to max out a lot of my favorite titles, and I'll be able to play a lot of upcoming titles like Battlefield 5 and Cyberpunk 2077.
That's a nice one. No one can play that.
Without worrying too much about the parts I have. When ray tracing GPUs come out, for example, I'll be able to upgrade without having to buy a completely new system.
Usually it's a good idea to upgrade the entire system every time you get a major part like a CPU or GPU, because otherwise you're likely to have a bottleneck, as much as I hate that word. It's just bad value to upgrade them in parts of the build, basically.
And if I have a problem down the line, I can always just swap out a part and have it serviced rather than losing my whole computer. And
that's odd that he mentions that.
And of course now we also have a computer to test and benchmark games here at The Verge.
Well, that was pretty cursed, but not as bad as I thought it would be. Like, basically every step is bad, but it's not like... It's basically, it's not that there's a lot of harmful information, it's just not useful at all, I think. So, I hope you enjoyed that, learned anything maybe from the commentary, and I will see you another time.